There's a key in my pocket. A small brass thing, number 17, on a faded blue ribbon. It chimes when I walk, like a memory that refuses to quiet down. 8 years ago, I was an assistant at Harbor City Public Library. Weeknights smelled like dust and lemon oil. Pages whispered. Elevators sighed. And if you were there after closing, you'd hear another sound, the gentle tap of a mop handle against the utility sink, and the low hum of a man who cleaned as if the floor were a chapel. His name was Mateo Rivas. He was the kind of quiet that makes people underestimate you, which is another way of saying people were often wrong about him. He remembered patrons by shoe squeak and cough pattern. He could tell you which shelf leaned a degree too far by the way the cartwheels pulled left. And once, when a kid cried over a broken pencil, Mateo carved the stub into a perfect point with a box cutter, placing it back like he was returning a sword. I wasn't brave. My courage came out sideways, alphabetized, neatly labeled. When I get scared, words tangle in my mouth. I stare at knots and pretend it's thinking. But I was good at listening, and I listened the night the rare map went missing. They wanted a neat story. Late shift, no one around. A janitor with keys to everything. Just sign, my manager said, sliding the incident report across the desk. Witness confirms he was alone in the archives. I looked down. The report ink felt heavier than usual, and I remembered a small thing. The ring-shaped scuff left in the hallway every Tuesday. A perfect circle where Mateo set his bucket while humming the same 3 notes. Notes that matched the chime of my elevator when it hit floor 17. No, I thought. The hallway remembers. Mateo didn't do this, I said, my voice fraying. I pointed to the cleaning logs I'd copied for a shelving project. Routes, times, the way his mop tracks looped like cursive. At 8:17 p.m., while the map disappeared, he was downstairs fixing a tilted sign. I knew because he'd asked me for tape, and I'd teased him for measuring twice. Calder, my manager warned, are you accusing staff of lying? I wasn't accusing, I was defending. Defending a name that had spent a lifetime swallowing its own vowels so others could pass. I didn't sign. The next morning, I was called insubordinate. By afternoon, I was let go. By evening, Mateo stood outside with a paper bag of his things, not fired, just isolated, watched. He held out a key on a blue ribbon. Found this under the archive's door, he said. Maybe it's yours. It wasn't. But I took it because sometimes a symbol chooses you. A small brass thing, number 17. He smiled, tight, tired. For the lock that matters, he whispered. And then he walked into a night that smelled like bleach and rain. People think kindness is soft. It isn't. It costs. It costs rent and sleep and the version of yourself that you promised your parents. I found a job stacking boxes in a warehouse. I learned how silence gets heavy if you don't give it somewhere to sit. Every week I wrote letters to the board about the map, and every week the letters came back with a shrug. And somewhere across the city, Mateo began his climb. He used to pause at the bulletin board by the staff exit, reading flyers for night classes, tutoring, literacy drives. He started going. He sat under flickering lights, tracing verbs with a forefinger that had known more bleach than ink. He failed a test, then another. He kept the graded papers in a manila envelope, folded once because the cheap bag he carried was too narrow. He sang along to the shape of the curve instead of the radio. On weekends, in a laundromat that smelled like detergent and oranges, he started a circle. 3 plastic chairs, a wobbly table, a whiteboard he salvaged from a school. He called it Streetlight Reading because the first night they had no bulbs, just the glow from the sidewalk. They began with bus schedules and medication labels, then poems that tasted like cinnamon, then blueprints. He learned to speak up. He learned to fail in public and return anyway. He learned that every library card is a tiny passport, and that you must stamp it yourself, 1 line at a time. When the city cut the budget, quietly, with the politeness reserved for things that matter to those with small voices, the last neighborhood branch was set to close. The press conference felt like a funeral in daylight. I watched from the back, the key in my pocket tapping its soft rhythm. And then I saw him. Mateo stepped to the microphone, hands still marked with cleaner, shirt sleeves too short. He didn't bring a sob story. He brought evidence. Attendance logs from Streetlight Reading. A petition signed in 9 languages. A plan to merge after-hours maintenance with supervised community tutoring. To keep buildings open by letting the people who clean them also teach in them. He even named the risk. that failure would be visible, and that the city should fund visible failure because it leads to visible learning. It landed like thunder that refuses to be loud. Reporters leaned in. A board member coughed into silence, but change doesn't clap on the first line. The proposal stalled. Someone leaked the map story to discredit him. A janitor with keys and a missing artifact. The headline smirked. The phone at the laundromat stopped ringing. He stood there one night, alone with a whiteboard and a damp floor. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thing I hadn't seen in years. A little blue ribbon, his own, not mine, and a photocopy of my unsent letter. The one he'd found in the trash the night I was fired. The one that said, "The floor remembers?" He stared at those words until they felt like hands on the back, pushing. He went back. He gathered allies. A retired engineer named Flint. A single mom, Rory, who balanced 2 jobs and brought her daughter to every session. And Iona, a city planner who secretly loved scrapbooks. They mapped attendance spikes on dryer doors with magnets. They trained tutors among night staff. They taught grammar with graffiti cleanup logs and geometry with mop roots. They turned the building itself into curriculum. 4 years into the climb, the city changed hands and the budget talks cracked open. The pilot program passed. Streetlight Reading got a building. Not much. An old ferry terminal with windows like tired eyes. They repaired the roof with bake sale money and favors. They opened the doors at dusk. I still wasn't brave. But I had learned a trick. If you can't lead, lift. I wrote grants. I carried chairs. I kept the key in my pocket like a metronome. Then came the knot in the thread. The small challenge before the stitch holds. On the morning of the dedication, a security guard checked the list and shook his head. "Not on here," he said. My name had slid somewhere beneath someone else's finger. Through the glass, I could see Mateo talking, laughing, pulling at a too stiff collar. I tapped the window. He didn't turn. I watched a parade of officials step to the podium. Saw my old manager in a new suit. For a second, pettiness climbed my throat. I almost went home. My fingers found the key. I held it up and the guard's face changed. "My mother used to clean this branch," he said quietly. 17 was the supply closet. She used to say, "If you ever need help, find 17. He opened the gate. I slid into a crowd that knew each other by first names and borrowed books. The mayor lifted a cloth to reveal carved letters. Mateo Rivas Library. People clapped. Cameras blinked. Mateo's eyes traveled over the sea of faces and didn't land on mine. He began to speak, then paused, head tilted, the way he did when a sound came from behind him. "I want to thank a person who is probably not on stage, and maybe not even on the list," he said, voice steady. I don't remember his title. I remember something better. I remember that he listened to a floor and it told the truth. He reached into his pocket. He took out a small brass key on a blue ribbon. Another 17. He'd made replicas for the tutors, for the night staff, for the kids who showed up in the rain. "Keys open doors," he said. "But they also ring when you move, to remind you that you're moving." The crowd laughed softly. He looked out again, and this time his eyes found me. For a heartbeat, he didn't recognize me. 8 years can blur a face. Then he did. He didn't call my name. He did something better. He lifted his key, and I lifted mine. Across the space, they chimed. 2 small notes finding each other in a room too large for words. There was more ceremony after that. Plaques, speeches, cameras. But the real opening happened when the first kid walked in, wet shoes squeaking on tile, and reached for a library card like it was a door handle. At dusk, when the building breathed its first evening, I found Mateo by a window that faced the water. We didn't say much. He traced the rim of a ring-shaped scuff in the floor. The contractors had missed it, or maybe they had left it on purpose. I set my key beside it. He set his. 2 small brass things on a circle that remembered. We let the quiet do the work. And in that quiet, you could hear it. The hum he used to sing. The chime of an elevator you can't see. The sound of a city realizing that sometimes the person who cleans the room is the person who saves it. A breath, the tiniest ring of keys. The door to 17 is open now, and it doesn't close softly.